Alright, my friends, to begin with, I'm going to be using two main brushes probably today, a number 2 and a number 6, and they're just round brushes. Alright, so we're going to start on the petals of the flowers first, and you can see that I've got 3 main tones here. We're going to start with a bright yellow tone, and we're going to water it down a little bit. So I've got mine right here. We're gonna add some water to it. And then I always test out my colors before I go and put it on the painting to see if that's actually the color that I want. And so that's about, I don't know, just a bright yellow, kind of a light color. If you want it lighter, you just put more water into it. So we're just gonna take our wet paint, and this paper is dry, and you just wanna apply the paint to the dry. All right, just fill in those petals with that yellow color, and we'll move on to the mid-tone stage. So we're gonna take that yellow color that we had for the base layer, and we're gonna add a bit of orange to that, and some red and some brown, and that's gonna give you this burnt orange look. Now my first layer dried pretty quickly, so I'm gonna have to go and soften these edges. And how you do that is you dunk your brush in some clean water, wipe it off on a paper towel, and you can go back and just go along those edges that are a bit hard, and you can soften them out. And so I'm gonna go and look at my reference photo and see where I'm gonna put that burnt orange color, and just trying to pay attention to where the light is hitting. And you're gonna have the brightest colors coming from this direction, because this is where the window and the sunlight's coming through. So you're gonna have the brightest colors on this side, and the shadows all along coming on the right hand side. So just looking at the reference photo and kind of paying attention to where the light hits and where the shadows are. And so I'm gonna go and put this next mid-tone color down, and then we're gonna continue. As I'm applying this orange, I'm also softening the edges as I go. All right, so I've applied that mid-tone, and now we're gonna mix up the darkest deep red shadow color. And so I'm gonna mix right directly into this orange color here. So I'm gonna add in some more red. Ooh, that's a lot of red. And then some brown. And that's a pretty vibrant color, so I'm gonna wanna darken this and like make it less saturated. And my favorite way of doing that is actually to take, I've got this purple color, I'll swatch it for you. And it's kind of like almost a dark gray purple. And I like to add this into my colors to kind of desaturate it. And it makes it a bit darker too. And so I'm gonna now test this out and see how this looks. I could probably go even a little bit darker than that. So let's take a bit more purple. And if you don't have purple, you would mix blue and red together. Or you could even put a little touch of black in there. Really, a little bit goes a long way with black though. All right, that looks pretty good. So it's a kind of a dark chocolatey brown almost. All right, so with this color, I also want it to have kind of blended edges. So I don't know if this is dry yet. So let's, yeah, it's pretty dry. So we're gonna have to blend the edges to get the look we want. So clean our brush, dry it off, and we're gonna wanna come back through here and kind of make it, we wanna get it wet here. And we're gonna need it a little bit more dark. So then you drop in your color, and see when it's wet, it kind of spreads out on its own, and that's kind of the look we want to go for. And so it's just gonna kind of work its way through those petals, which is perfect. So I'm gonna go in and darken up these areas. We should have some of this brown color left over, and I'm gonna go ahead and start right in on the center flower. So because the petals are all still wet, you wanna just make sure that your paint isn't gonna be touching the petal, or it's gonna bleed into each other and maybe cause an effect that you might not want. And you know what, if it happens, don't panic. It'll be fine. So we would just want to maybe keep a little bit of white. And we're going to go in on this one as well. And just get a base layer down, and then we're going to darken up this color just to create a little bit of depth. Okay, so now we're going to darken up this color so we can mix in right in this brown. So we're going to add a bit more brown, some red. I'm gonna add that purple color in. Okay, and then what I wanna do is actually add a touch of black. And like I said, a little goes a long way, so you wanna be a bit sparing with this and go slow, because you can always add more. It's hard to go back in watercolor. All right, so let's test this color out and see how dark it is. I'm gonna say, let's go a little bit darker. So I'm gonna take a black again and put that in. Maybe a touch more. We kind of want it just a really, really dark brown black almost. And I think that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna take this, and because the sunlight's coming from this, we want most of the dark area concentrated on this side. And because this is still wet, as you drop it in, it's gonna kind of disperse, and you wanna just put it all on the right-hand side here. And same with this one. And that will give it a bit of a light effect, just like that. And bam, the middle is done. At this point, you're probably gonna wanna change into some clean water. All right, next we're gonna jump and we're gonna let the flowers dry before we start doing the leaves and stems. And we're gonna go right to the jar. So we've got some clean water. And then, so to make turquoise, it's really a mixture of green and blue. So depending on what kind of green and blue you have, you're gonna have to experiment a little bit. So I'm gonna take one of the blues I have and a green. And I'm gonna mix that and then test it out. That's maybe a shade on the green side, so I'm gonna add in a bit more blue. And you're gonna wanna add quite a bit of water to this because I know my colors are quite saturated. So this is gonna be much too strong, so you're gonna have to add some water into this. So I'm gonna wash my brush and then drop in a little bit of water to lighten this up. And that's probably a better color to start with. You can see it's quite a bit lighter. You're gonna have to pay attention to where you see the lightest values. So on this jar, at first glance, you look at the reference photo and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. But let's break it down. So we're gonna take that turquoise color, and then I think we're gonna start at the top end here. And I'm just gonna be mindful of where I think I see some of these white highlights. So I'm gonna add a line here. And there's a bit of a highlight in this middle section, so I'm just going to not paint that turquoise and kind of leave this little white section here. And then same with this area. You can always go over at the end with a white gouache if you want to brighten those areas up. But it's good practice to kind of keep mindful of where you see those whites and those lightest lights and just avoid painting them. And that's going to give you the brightest and kind of like best looking watercolor. And we're just going to bring this down, and I'm going to kind of maybe outline the jar a little bit with this color. Go down, get some more pigment. And I want to kind of blend this out. So I'm going to clean my brush, dry it off, take my clean brush and try to soften these edges a little and make this whole bottom section a bit wet. Take some more pigment, and that way this color is now going to be able to disperse into the wet area. And let's finish outlining the jar like that. And then we're gonna go in to this top section. We want to blend it out again, so wash your brush, dry it, and just try to soften these edges right here. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? All right, some more pigment. And there's gonna be a kind of a bright highlight just at the base of where this waterline is sitting. So we wanna keep mindful of that as we go ahead and paint. All right, let's go down. We might have to come in later and fix our highlights a bit. Okay, more pigment. And then just soften those edges out. And I'm keeping a highlight on this side, and then I tried to keep a highlight kind of underneath this waterline. Right, next we're gonna do the shadow at the base here. I've kind of smudged the paint, that's okay. We're gonna make that a shadow anyway. So I'm gonna take some of this brown here, and I wanna desaturate it a bit. So I'm gonna add a bit of blue and see how I like that. And that's kind of make it a bit more gray. With shadows, you don't want to use straight black. That's going to give you an unrealistic shadow. And so now this is kind of a warm gray, and that will be perfect. We can use that color. And you just want to make sure that this bottom jar is mostly dry, or we're going to have this gray color bleed into it. So I'm just going to, I don't know if it's dry or not, so I'm just going to go around it for now. Okay, and I'm going to take my clean brush and just soften that shadow up a bit. Okay, and I'm going to take that same color and then just drop some of the dark pigment at the base of the jar here. And that will keep this area the darkest. And that color is going to disperse into the wet section here. And if you're picking up some of that brown pigment, that's fine too. And I'm just going to clean my brush and just blend that edge, because we were getting a bit of a hard edge there. Perfect. So that's all we got to do for that shadow, pretty quick. So now we're going to move on to the stems and leaves, and The green that I use, which I really like, is this. It's called gold green, and it's essentially just green with a bunch of yellow in it. So it almost, I feel like it's almost a yellow with a little bit of green in it. So if you don't have that, play around, mix some yellow into the whatever green you have and water it down, and you should get a fairly light color, similar to this anyway. So we're gonna just lay that base color down on the dry paper where you see the stems and leaves, and then we'll mix up the midtone. Okay, so let's mix up our next color. And so I'm gonna take this gold green that I have already, and I have a darker green here. Let's swatch that. So I'm gonna add this into my gold green to get a darker mid-tone. And then I'm gonna test that out. You know what, that's perfect. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply this. And with this, I want a kind of blended edge. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put down this paint. I'm gonna clean my brush and dry it, and then just go over that area, and that's gonna make it look softer. It's gonna take that hard edge away, but you still want to kind of think about the brightness coming from this direction. So you want to put the darkest color on the right hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off, and we'll mix the next color. All right, so we need to darken this up one more time. And creating layers like this really helps with the realism of the piece. And you can get as detailed as you want with it. The more layers you add, the more detailed it gets. So I'm gonna get that kind of dark green color and mix more of that in there. And then I want to make it a bit darker. So I'm gonna add a tiny bit of black to it and see how I like it. And that's probably pretty good. It's kind of like a black green, as it were. And now I want to do the same thing as the mid-tone layer. I want to just make a thin line of that dark color and blend it out so it's not such a harsh line. So clean your brush and try to keep as much as that light coming in this direction as you can. And then we're just gonna go through and do that throughout the whole painting. Next, I'm gonna add just a couple final darker details to the jar now that it's dry. So I'm gonna take my previous turquoise color and then mix in some of that dark green. And I'm gonna test that out. I'm gonna add maybe a touch of that purple color just to kind of make it a little bit more gray. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with that. That kind of made it a bit gray. Perfect. So I'm gonna take that, dab off some of the pigment because it's a bit wet. And I'm gonna go through and just pick up some of the darker highlights on this jar. And that will just add to the realism a little bit. Not that it's super realistic, but darken down here. and soften that edge. And I'm gonna go and soften the edges of all these dark shadow areas. And just blend them out. All right, then I'm gonna take a really watered down concentration of that turquoise color, and I'm just gonna really lightly wash it over the water area, just to kind of bring it all together. And you want to keep this pretty light. You don't want to go dark with that. Water it down quite a bit. All right, so we let this dry, and now I'm gonna go through, and this is a bleed proof white by Dr. Martens. You can also get white gouache, would do the same as well. So I'm gonna use this part's optional, but I'm gonna go and add some highlights back into this, just because I painted over them. So you're gonna wanna get a fine tip brush. This one's a 0. And I'm just gonna pay attention to the reference photo and go through and add back some of these highlights. In some of my larger paintings, I will actually use a masking fluid, and it's actually a rubber, and it's a liquid that dries as a rubber, sorry. And that will preserve the whites of the paper. But I always end up having to add a little tiny bit of this white gouache back in, because somehow I always seem to miss highlights. And I just go back in and use this, and it works pretty good. Also gonna go and add just a little couple dots. Give the middle part of this flower a bit of visual interest. And I'm also gonna put a few highlights on the stems here. One more. I'm gonna put one in the shadow area too. Okay, that's it. We are done. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm gonna post some reference photos for the next tutorial, and so you guys will be able to vote on what image you would like to paint next.